Some people show you exactly who they are in the first 5 minutes, and some people, the ones who matter, take an entire season to reveal themselves. I have been thinking about Sylvia Baird for a long time now, and I think her story deserves to be told the way she actually lived it. Slowly, honestly, and without skipping the parts where she was wrong. Sylvia Baird was 37 years old when she drove her truck into the yard of a cattle operation outside of Pincher Creek, Alberta, and decided within 60 seconds that the man who owned it was exactly the kind of person she had no use for. She had not come looking for a life, she had come looking for work. After 11 years as a ranch bookkeeper and operations manager for a large outfit near High River, the operation had sold and the new owners had brought their own people. Sylvia had references, experience, and a reputation in the industry as someone who could untangle any financial mess a ranch had managed to make of itself. She was also, as her former employer once told her, not particularly easy to work with if you expected her to stay quiet when she thought you were wrong. He had said it as a compliment. Not everyone received it that way. The job posting had been brief, 1 paragraph. A working cattle ranch near Pincher Creek, 800 head, needed an operations manager with full accounting responsibility. The pay was fair. The listing said the position had been vacant for 7 months. She had found out later that 2 people had taken the job in those 7 months and both had quit before the end of their 3rd week. The man she met in that yard on a Tuesday morning in late March was Owen Graves. He was standing beside a water trough, pulling a pump apart with his bare hands, a wrench tucked under his arm, grease up to his wrists. He was somewhere in his early 40s, she guessed, though the sun and the cold had done their work on him. He did not look up when she parked. He did not look up when she got out. He did not look up when she walked toward him and said her name and that she was there about the position. He said, without looking up, "Books are in the office. Lock's broken on the door so you can just go in. I'll be there in a bit." Sylvia stood in the yard for a moment and looked at the back of his head. Then she went into the office. It took him 45 minutes to come in. She used the time to look at the books, which were, in her professional assessment, a controlled disaster. Not dishonest. She had seen dishonest and this was not that. But the filing system had the logic of someone who had built it entirely for himself, with no expectation that anyone else would ever need to understand it. There were 3 separate spreadsheet systems that did not talk to each other. There were handwritten ledger entries tucked into a folder labeled with a year that was 4 years ago. There was a diesel fuel tracking sheet that stopped in October and resumed with no explanation in February. She was not impressed. She was not unimpressed either. She was simply reading. Owen Graves came in, washed his hands in the small sink in the corner, dried them with a paper towel, and sat across from her without taking his coat off. He said, "Well," she said, "your accounts payable is 8 months behind. You have a fuel credit you never claimed from your supplier from 2 years ago. It's about $400, still sitting there. And whoever set up your cattle tracking spreadsheet did it in a way that I think made sense to them at the time, but has nothing to do with how anyone else in this industry organizes that data." Owen Graves looked at her. He had pale gray eyes and the expression of a man who was neither offended nor particularly moved by anything she had just said. He said, "That was me." I said it. "No." There was a silence. He said, "Can you fix it?" "Yes," he said. "When can you start?" She said. He said, "I have some questions first." He said, "Go ahead." She asked about the 2 previous managers and why they had left. He told her with the same flat evenness he seemed to apply to everything, that the first had found the location too remote and the winters too hard, and the second had wanted to change things faster than he was comfortable with, and they had disagreed too often. He said the last part without any particular judgment, just as a fact. Sylvia thought, there it is, a man who cannot be disagreed with, a man who will listen to your ideas and then do it his way anyway. She had worked for one of those before and had lasted 8 months before she had handed in her notice rather than watch another preventable mistake get made because someone's pride was more important than the operation. She took the job anyway, because the alternative was a position in Calgary doing corporate agriculture consulting, which paid better, and which she would have hated. She told herself it was a practical decision. She was wrong about that. But it would take the better part of a year to find out how wrong. The ranch sat at the edge of the foothills, the Rockies visible on clear days to the west like a wall someone had forgotten to finish. The land was not pretty in the way that people who did not work land thought of pretty. It was white and brown in March with patches of old snow in the north-facing hollows, and a wind that came off the mountains without anything to slow it down. Sylvia had grown up on a mixed farm in Saskatchewan. She was not bothered by wind. The house she was given was a small 1-story building about 200 meters from the main house. It had been used for ranch hands and before that, she was told, for a foreman who had worked the place for 20 years before retiring. It was clean and cold and had good bones and she liked it immediately. Owen Graves did not give her a tour. He gave her a key and told her where the propane shutoff was and left. In the first 2 weeks, Sylvia did not see him except at a distance, moving through the yard in the early dark before she was properly awake, or coming in from the pastures in the late afternoon when she was still at her desk. He did not check on her work, he did not ask how it was going. He did not make any attempt at the kind of casual conversation that most people use to establish a working relationship. She found this confirming, distant, cold. The kind of man who hired people and then left them to sink or swim, because he either did not care or did not know how. She fixed the accounts payable in the first week. She claimed the fuel credit. She rebuilt the cattle tracking system from scratch, designed so that anyone, including a person who had never set foot on this ranch, could open it and understand exactly what they were looking at within 10 minutes. She left a printed copy on his desk with a one-page explanation. 3 days later she found a note on her desk in handwriting that was plain and careful and slightly too large. Like someone who had learned to write without being taught properly and had figured it out on their own. The note said, "This is better, thank you," that was all. Sylvia read it twice and then set it aside and told herself it meant nothing except that he had enough manners to acknowledge good work, which was the bare minimum she expected from an employer. The spring was calving season, and calving season on a ranch that size was controlled chaos at the best of times. Sylvia's job was operations and finance, not livestock, but on a working ranch of 500 head with a crew of 4. The distinction between jobs blurred fast when there was a calf stuck in a ditch at 2 in the morning. She helped where she was needed and asked no credit for it. It was during calving that she first had reason to watch Owen Graves work. He worked without wasted motion. That was the first thing she noticed. Every action connected to the next, nothing performative, nothing done for an audience. He could read an animal's distress from 50 meters in a way that took most ranchers years to develop, if they developed it at all. He was patient in a way that seemed almost biological, as if patience for him was not a choice but simply a state of being. He was also, she noticed, the last one in at night and the first one out in the morning. And he never asked his crew to do anything he was not already doing himself. She had expected a man who ran the operation from a distance and let other people carry the actual weight. She had not expected this. She filed the observation away and did not adjust her assessment of him. Not yet. Because people could be good at their work and still be impossible to disagree with, and that was the part that actually mattered. The first time she disagreed with him, it was about the hay supply. They were coming into May, and she had been tracking the feed numbers and the projections, and she calculated that they were going to come up short before the summer pastures were ready. Not catastrophically short, but short enough that if the spring stayed cold, and the forecast said it might, they would be buying hay at a bad time of year at a bad price. She brought it to him on a Thursday morning with the numbers printed out. She showed him the projection. She showed him what she thought they should do, which was to call their supplier now and negotiate a reserve before other operations in the area started looking for the same thing. He read the numbers. He looked out the window for a moment. He said, "The pastures will be ready by the 3rd week of May." She said, "Maybe. But if they're not, we'll be buying at spot price." He said, "They'll be ready." She said, "What's your confidence level on that?" He looked at her then, not annoyed, not dismissive, just looking, the way he looked at everything, steadily and without telling you what he was thinking. He said, "High." She said, "Mine is medium, and this ranch's financial risk tolerance, based on the numbers I've been looking at for 6 weeks, is not high." There was a silence. He said, "Call the supplier, tell them we may need a reserve and ask what the cost of holding that option would be." She said, "I already got a quote. It's $1,200 for a 30-day option on 60 tons. He looked at her. She could not tell if he was annoyed that she had already moved ahead of the conversation or something else entirely. He said, "Do it." She did it. The pastures were ready by the 18th of May, which was before her projection but not before his. They did not need the hay. The option cost them $1,200. At the end of the month, Owen left an envelope on her desk. Inside was a check for $1,200, made out to her personally, with a note that said, "Good call, the cost of being right should not come out of your pocket." Sylvia looked at that note for a long time. In her previous experience, men who ran operations with that kind of instinctive confidence did not acknowledge when someone else's caution had been worth spending money on. They absorbed the outcome as confirmation that they had been right to listen. They did not write checks. They certainly did not write notes that said the cost of being right should not come out of your pocket. She brought the check back to him, and said she could not accept it. The $1,200 was a legitimate business expense, and she would process it that way. He said, "It's already done." She said, "Owen." He said, "Sylvia." She said, "I'm putting it through as a business expense." He said, "Then you'll be having an argument with your own bookkeeping, because I already deposited the amount back into the operations account." She stared at him. He had somehow managed to make a gesture of fairness so completely that she could not undo it without creating more work for herself. She said, "That is a very strange way to do things." He said, "Probably." He went back to whatever he had been reading. She stood there for another moment, the check still in her hand, and felt something shift very slightly in the picture she had assembled of Owen Graves, the way a joint settles in a cold snap. She drove home that evening thinking about it more than she wanted to. Sylvia's deepest professional fear. The one that had made her leave the High River operation even before the sale, that had made her careful about who she worked for, that had kept her from taking 2 other positions that had looked fine on paper. Was this, that she would work for someone who valued her until she contradicted him, and then would value her less. She had seen it happen. She had watched women in this industry give their best analysis and have it received warmly right up until it cost the man in charge something he had not expected to pay, and then watched the warmth drain out of the relationship like water from a cracked trough. She was watching for it with Owen Graves. She was watching carefully. The summer went on. The operation moved into the rhythms of the grazing season. Sylvia got better at the cattle tracking system she had rebuilt, refining it month by month, and began to see patterns in the data that told her things about the herd's productivity that the previous system had been hiding. She brought Owen a report in July that identified a segment of the herd that was underperforming relative to feed cost. It was not a dramatic finding. It was the kind of thing that showed up when you had clean data and looked at it carefully over time. Owen read the report. He sat with it for 2 days. He came to her on the 3rd day and said, "I've been thinking the same thing about that group for 2 years, but I didn't have the numbers to back it up. What do you think we should do?" Sylvia told him what she thought they should do. He said, "Walk me through the numbers again." She did. He asked questions, precise and practical, the kind of questions that told her he understood the data and was not just being polite. At the end he said, "Do you want to handle the culling plan or do you want me to?" She said, "I'll draft it, you check the livestock side of it," he said. Good. They worked on it together over 3 weeks. At the end of it, Owen told the crew the plan and introduced it as something he and Sylvia had worked out together, which she had not expected him to do. She still had not adjusted her assessment. Not fully. Because the thing about people who eventually prove impossible to work with, is that they are usually fine right up until they are not, and you never know which interaction will be the one that breaks the pattern. She was waiting. She was always waiting. The fall came and with it the end of the grazing season and the beginning of the long work of preparing for winter. Sylvia had been at the ranch for 7 months. She had not quit and no one had asked her to leave. She had not become easy to know. She was not certain she had ever been easy to know, but she had become, she thought, at least comprehensible. She could read Owen's silences now, the way you eventually learn to read a piece of land. This silence means he is thinking. This one means he has already decided. This one means he is not going to explain his reasoning and does not think he should have to. She had stopped waiting for him to become the man she had decided he was on the first day. Not because she had decided he was not that man, but because she was too busy to keep watching for it. In November, one of the crew, a young man named Travis who had been with the operation for 2 seasons, made a significant error. He miscalculated a medication dosage for a group of cattle that were being treated for respiratory illness. The error was not his alone. The system for recording and verifying medication had gaps in it. But the outcome was bad. 3 animals died. The loss was around $9,000. It was the kind of thing that could break a working relationship. Sylvia had seen it happen. The anger, the blame, the way a man who feels his operation has been damaged turns that damage outward. She was in the office when Owen spoke to Travis. She was not meant to hear it. The wall between the office and the equipment room where they were standing was thin. Owen said, "Tell me what happened." Travis told him all of it. The miscalculation, the verification step he had skipped because it was late and he was tired. The moment he had realized. There was a silence. Then Owen said, "The verification step is there because people get tired. That's why it exists. This is partly on the system." Travis said something she could not make out. Owen said, "We're going to fix the system so this doesn't happen again. That's the first thing. The second thing is, are you okay? Because finding that in the morning is not nothing." Another silence. Then Travis said quietly that he was not really okay. Owen said, "Yeah, take the afternoon." Sylvia sat at her desk and did not move for a moment. She thought about the man she had decided Owen Graves was in the first 60 seconds in his yard, while he was pulling a pump apart and did not look up. She thought about the 7 months that had followed. She thought about the note. The cost of being right should not come out of your pocket. She thought, I have been watching this man for 7 months for evidence that he was who I decided he was. And I have not found it. Not once. She was not ready to call herself wrong. She was too careful for that. But she was beginning to understand that the caution she had brought to this place, caution that had been earned over years and in other situations with other people, had been applied maybe to a situation it did not fit. The winter that year came early and hard, the way winters in that part of Alberta sometimes did. By the end of November the temperature was dropping into the -20s at night, and the Chinooks that usually offered relief through December were slow to come. Sylvia knew cold. She had grown up with Saskatchewan cold, which was a different thing from mountain cold. drier and steadier without the sudden sunset that came when the wind shifted in the foothills. She was careful, but she was not afraid of it. In the second week of December, she drove out to check on a water line that had been running slow. It was her habit to handle small infrastructure issues herself when she could. Partly because she was efficient, and partly because she disliked asking for help with things she could manage alone. She drove out in the early afternoon in good visibility and found the access point for the line on the north side of a quarter section about 8 kilometers from the yard. What she did not account for was the ice on the access road that had formed overnight under a thin layer of new snow. Invisible in the flat December light, the truck went sideways on a slope, slow and inexorable in the way that vehicles on ice go sideways, and came to rest in the ditch with the passenger side door pressed into the bank. She was not hurt, but the truck was not coming out of that ditch without help, and her phone had one bar of signal that came and went and would not hold a call. She had the truck's emergency kit. She had her coat. It was -17 and the wind was picking up and she was 8 kilometers from the yard and she could not call out. She began composing in her head the rational steps. Stay with the vehicle, conserve heat, try the signal every few minutes. She knew better than to walk it. 8 kilometers at -17 with a wind building was not a walk. She had seen what that math produced. What she had not accounted for was Owen. He had seen from the yard that she had driven north and had not come back. He had noticed, because this was the kind of thing Owen Graves noticed, without making it obvious that he was paying attention, that she had taken the route toward the north water line. He had also noticed, though he had not said anything to her, that the temperature had dropped faster that afternoon than the forecast had predicted and the wind had shifted. He took the second truck and the tow chain and came looking. He found her 40 minutes after the truck went into the ditch. She heard the engine before she saw the headlights, and she felt something she was not accustomed to feeling. Relief so immediate it came up her chest like a physical thing. He got the truck out of the ditch in 20 minutes with the tow chain. He did not lecture her. He did not ask why she had gone alone or why she had not told anyone where she was going, though both were fair questions. He checked the truck for damage, found it drivable and said, "Follow me back." She followed him back. In the yard he got out of his truck and she got out of hers and she said, "Thank you." He said, "Sure," she said. Owen, he looked at her. The yard light was on and it was full dark by then and she could see his face clearly. She said, "I owe you more than that. You came out looking." Said, "Of course I did." She said, "You didn't have to." He said, "You're on my land. It's -17. Of course I came looking." She stood there in the cold, and looked at him and said something she had not planned to say, something that came from the 7 months behind her, and from the ditch, and from the cold and from the note about the cost of being right. She said, "When I got here in March I decided in the first minute that you were going to be exactly like 2 other men I'd worked for, who were good at their work and impossible to be honest with. I spent 7 months waiting for you to prove it." He looked at her. He said, "I know." She said, "You knew?" He said, "You're not hard to read when you're watching someone for a reason. I figured it would sort itself out." She said, "You weren't bothered by it?" He said, "I was a little bothered by it." He said this without heat. "But I also figured I couldn't tell you who I was. You had to see it. People do." Sylvia Baird, who had driven out alone in December and slid into a ditch and been found in the dark and who was standing in -17 degrees in a ranch yard in the foothills of the Rockies, said, "I was wrong about you from the first minute." Owen Graves said, "Yeah," he said it without triumph. "Most people are for a while. It's not a character flaw." He paused. "Go warm up." She went inside. She sat in the small house with the propane heat running, and thought about the picture she had assembled of Owen Graves on the morning she arrived. Distant, cold, the kind of man who would use her expertise, and then not hear it when it contradicted him. She had built that picture from 60 seconds of observation in a yard, before she had read a single line of his books, before she had sat across a desk from him and shown him numbers that cost money, and had him respond by making sure the cost did not fall on her. She had brought her past into his yard and laid it over him like a template and spent 7 months trying to confirm the fit. She was ashamed of that. She did not tell him so, not that night, but the shame was clarifying in the way that cold is clarifying. It made everything very simple and very sharp. After that night something changed, though it changed slowly, the way things change on a ranch without announcement or drama. They began to talk more. Not small talk. Neither of them had much patience for it. But the kind of talk that emerges between 2 people who have spent months thinking carefully about the same problems, and have finally stopped being careful with each other. He told her, one evening in January, when they were both in the office going over the year-end projections, that he had bought the operation 8 years ago from a man who had run it into the ground, through a combination of bad luck and worse record-keeping, and that the first 3 years he had run it alone because he could not afford staff, and had learned everything the hard way. She said, "That explains the filing system." He said, "That explains the filing system." She told him about the High River operation, About the 11 years and the sale and the thing it felt like to have the work of a decade become someone else's decision. She told him about the 2 other positions she had turned down before she had seen his listing. She told him that she had almost taken the Calgary consulting job. And would probably have been miserable. He said, "Why didn't you?" She said, "I've spent enough time in offices." He said, "Yeah." There was a comfortable silence and she thought, "I have been here 10 months, and I am sitting in this office in January having a conversation I could not have had in March, and the only thing that changed is that I stopped being so certain I already knew who I was talking to." The operation went well that year. Sylvia had rebuilt the financial systems from the ground up by spring. And by the following autumn the ranch was running with a clarity and efficiency that both of them could see in the numbers. The herd was in better shape. The cost per head had come down. Owen was able to plan ahead in ways that the old system had made impossible because no one could see far enough into the data to project with confidence. He told her, in the spring of the second year, that she was the best hire he had ever made. She said, "You should have been clearer about that in the job listing." He said, "The listing was fine." She said, "It said the position had been open for 7 months. That is not fine," he said. "The right person takes as long as it takes." She looked at him. He was looking at a fence report and not at her. And his expression was entirely neutral. And she was no longer sure whether Owen Graves ever said things like that by accident. She did not say anything, but she filed it. It is not my place to tell you how the rest of that story went, because some things are private and some things belong to the people who live them. What I can tell you is that the ranch outside Pincher Creek is still running, and it is running well, and there are 2 names on the operation now where there used to be 1. What I can tell you is what Sylvia told me, years later, about the morning she drove into that yard and made her assessment in 60 seconds. She said, "I wasn't wrong that he was hard to read. I was wrong that hard to read meant what I thought it meant. I had learned that from the wrong people and I applied it to the wrong man, and it took me a winter to admit it." She said, "The coat with the hole in it is never the thing, it's never the thing, but we keep looking at the coat." I have thought about that a long time. I grew up in a part of this country where people tend to show you very little on the surface and everything underneath, if you are patient enough to wait for it. I have misjudged people by their surfaces more times than I can count, and I have had people misjudge me by mine, and I am not sure which one stays with you longer. Owen Graves did not try to prove himself to Sylvia Baird. He understood, in the way that some people do, that you cannot demonstrate who you are to someone who has already decided. You can only keep being who you are, steadily and without argument, until the other person finds their way to seeing it. That is a kind of patience that I think of as particularly Canadian, if I am honest about it. A willingness to let the land and the work and the time do the talking, and to trust that the truth of a person will come out the same way the truth of a season does. Not all at once, but completely, eventually, and in its own time. If this story stayed with you, I want to ask you something directly. Has there been someone in your life who you misjudged in the first few minutes? And when did you realize you had been looking at the wrong thing? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want another story about 2 people who had to find their way past what they assumed about each other, it is waiting for you right here.